Today is September 26, 2017. This is Kara Neurohr, and I'm honored to be with Steve Gragert, retired director of the Will Rogers Memorial Museum in Claremore, Oklahoma. We are at the OSU Library to talk about Dr. Angie Debo. Thank you for agreeing to participate in this interview today, Steve.
Well, thank you, and I'm honored to be with you.
Okay, let's start by having you tell me a little bit about yourself.
Very good. Okay, a little bit about myself. As I would tell people as I speak about Will Rogers, go about Oklahoma to relate about Will, I would say that I'm a history major. I knew of Will, but I didn't really know him until I came to Oklahoma for graduate school. I grew up in the neighborhood of where Harry Truman was. I knew President Harry Truman, and knew of the President Harry Truman and others in the James Boyce in Missouri. I went to school in Kansas, knew Dwight Eisenhower, knew of him. I knew OOHRP, came to Oklahoma. Had no idea who Will Rogers really was until I had a chance to be immersed in his work. And that was something that came as a surprise to me, came as a pleasure to me over time. And my life with Will Rogers has been a real pleasure. You can't help but have fun when you're working with Will and his words and his wisdom.
What year did you come to Oklahoma?
My wife and I were married in Kansas, in Lindsborg, Kansas, on a Saturday in 1975. And we started graduate school here at OSU that Monday, 1975, and really haven't left since.
How did you first become acquainted with Angie Debo?
I became acquainted just through her words, through the work that, prolific work that she produced. Yes, because my major was history, focused quite a bit on Native American history, and that's where she was most focused on her writing and her own history. And so I knew her through her words. I hadn't met her until I had the opportunity to take on a project to build the bibliography of her work. And it was a pleasure to go to Marshall, to sit in her house and visit with her. Such a brilliant mind. And it was obviously late in her life, but her mind was very sharp. And it was a time that I still can remember sitting in that house and visiting with her, and correspondence that we had, that you have the letters now. It was a real pleasure, a real opportunity for me to learn more about a great person, but also her work. And that was something I will never forget.
So was this around 1980, the dates on the correspondence?
Correct. It was a project that came to us out of the history department, came to us being myself and Patrick McLaughlin, who was also a graduate student in the history department at the time. And we were assigned this project to work on the bibliography. Short biographical sketch, which actually was her own, and building particularly the bibliography that had not been published before. Not all the elements of her work had not been put on paper before in cumulative edition.
Do you remember which history professor at OSU assigned you and Patrick to this project?
I think we were working, I believe it was Dr. Fisher. Dr. Neurohr Fisher was the one who initiated the project, which is typical for the history department at the time. Dr. Neurohr Fisher was the prime historian in the department regarding Oklahoma history.
Was the work that you and Patrick did as far as her publications, was that for a particular project or event?
Well, there was going to be an opportunity to honor her for her career that year and her relationship with OSU. And so that was my understanding, that was the primary purpose of the production that we were working on, was to have that as part of that evening of celebration of her time, career with OSU.
Did Patrick go with you to visit her home?
No, it was just myself.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick was working on some other things, but so I had the pleasure of having an opportunity to work directly with her and on my own.
So take me back to your first visit to her home, and just describe what that was like.
Well, I didn't get lost going to Marshall. I'm not from Oklahoma. I didn't get lost going to Marshall, get lost finding her house, because in her letter to me, that first letter to me, she outlined it very clearly where I was to turn and the small house that I will find as I went around the corner. So I had no problem finding her home. But it was my first trip to Marshall, for that matter. But I just remember it was a small house, but that's how she described it herself.
Mm-hmm.
It was a small, very neatly appointed house, and it was full of books. And one of the things that I've always done is I go into somebody's home. One of the first things I take a look at are their library. Is there a library? And I just study people's libraries. And of course, unfortunately, that is becoming less of an opportunity in my later life, as people have fewer libraries out there, books, but hers was special as I was looking at it. And obviously, a lot of the books were her work, but then by the same token, there was a tremendous number of books, as you have in this room and even behind me, I believe, her books, and they are of all types, but most particularly history, Native American, especially Indian tribes that settled in Oklahoma, and but also other Western history too. And I just enjoyed being amongst that. And then just the comfortable situation in that house. She was in her favorite chair. I think it was her favorite chair. It might have been the one that you have right here in the room. But I can't, those are details I can't verify. Mm-hmm. But she was comfortably sitting there at the table, the dining room table, answering my questions, correcting me when I needed to be corrected, which was often. And just it was a marvelous experience.
So were you just taking notes?
I was taking notes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, those from the days before we had computers that we could access. So everything was handwritten, and I was taking the notes.
And were your notes then primarily all about her publications, things that she wrote?
Yes. And unfortunately, I don't have those notes. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go back. As I've said, we have a lot of things packed in preparation for moving. So some of those papers some of those documents, some of those items might be among the files that have been packed away. Because I have had a habit over the years of keeping things. So it might be there.
Okay. So, but the end result then was this?
Yes, the end result was this is the first version of the Angie Debo biographical sketch and bibliography of her published works. It's a booklet that we did at part of the Department of History and in cooperation with the library, as you can see. And she actually, as I mentioned, she produced the biographical sketch. That's her own. But the publications of Angie Debo were the ones that, what's the work that we were focused on in compiling and getting the details, the publishing details and so forth, the editing details, and get those properly arranged and following Chicago Manual style and get it published. At the time, Phi Alpha Theta, which is the history fraternity, and we had, I was my opportunity to be a part of that was here, actually it's at Wichita State University, where my master's was, but also I had an opportunity to be a part of the Phi Alpha Theta organization here, and was president for at least 1 year, and we did a lot of different work, but this was part of that same effort, part of the work that Phi Alpha Theta, because we've also started a historical review that about that same time, or shortly thereafter. So it gave us an opportunity to get to be doing some publishing that we did not have a chance before, other individually or as students. But coming up with all the work that she had produced, and as you can see, there's all of her reviews of books and articles, which are many from publications that produced all over the country. And again, getting the details correct. And I don't want to misstate what, as I recall, trying to put that together from what she provided us versus what we might have had to work on independently. But it is my sense that she had everything right there. And she gave us files. She gave us a lot of files to take with them. Well, gave me a lot of files to take with me back here to OSU to work from, as far as her work and making certain that the citations were proper and so forth. But I was given a lot of files, which, by the way, I did return.
So what were your impressions of her as a person?
As I said, you can immediately sense that from her remark, from her work, certainly, but also as she spoke, that this was no ordinary individual. She was a superb mind, and incisive, and she would not hesitate, as she did not with me, make a criticism if it needed to be made. She did it in a diplomatic fashion, but she was not averse to sitting back and not averse to being forward with her challenges to what we might have produced to make certain that it was correct. In fact, after the first publication in 1980, again, I got a letter from her that that I was missing. I missed 2 or 3 citations that should have been in that publication, and so that was updated, and the later edition included those in. That the later edition is 85. So, so she was very strong-minded, but also of high mind as far as her work, as far as her production, as far as her relationships with other people. It was a pleasure to just simply know her, let alone have an opportunity to be with her and to talk to her and enjoy her.
So we've established that the first publication was in 1980,
Correct.
And then we've seen the updated version in 85, and then it was reused in 1988 in a publication that was, yes, posthumously. So are you aware if the list of publications has been used for anything else or not?
I don't know if it's been cited. I haven't really done any research on that myself. I would think that people have used it. I would think that it's been used, accessed here, elsewhere. People that are wanting to document Angie's work, and there have been many people over time that have done that, that have followed her work, and they wanted to make certain, I suppose, that they were having a chance to read and peruse all that she has produced, which would be quite good. And also it comes to my mind that I trust that that work is still available in its entirety. I don't know.
I think that we might be interested in adding that online through the OSU library with
Yes.
the publication list. With proper
Publication
credit
list,
to you,
huh?
I don't believe that it's online at this time, but I think that is would be another way for researchers to see the extensive list of her
Mhm.
publications. So.
It's a publication of the library, so and the Department of History is a joint project, and so I don't think we'd have any problems getting permission to do that. But again, I was thinking whether all of her work is still accessible. I don't know. Is there any? I haven't checked it out myself. I would assume, I would hope it is, but maybe not.
Well, hopefully, if you were working from her files, then things that were in her collection were deposited here at the library with the other materials in the collection. So,
I would hope so. Yeah.
Did anything surprise you about her in the interactions that you had with her?
Another thing that directly comes to my mind. A lot of time has passed, unfortunately, since that day that I was with her. And I went back, obviously, to deliver the materials to her. But she was a simple person. She lived a simple life, but she was not simple in the manner of her speaking, or in the manner of her intelligence, in the manner of her expressions. But it was walking into that house. It was very comfortable, yes, but it wasn't ostentatious. It was that of as her image projects, somebody that lived comfortably unto herself.
Okay. So you brought several pieces of correspondence here today.
Yes.
And if we could just go through those, and we'll start with the March 5th, 1980 letter.
Mm-hmm.
And if you'll just maybe describe that briefly and tell me if anything stands out to you about that particular letter.
I think even the language that she uses, very courteous, but very direct. I'm going to make this brief, and I hope my typographical errors will not make it difficult to read. And I've been trying to think through some of the things we shall discuss when you come Tuesday afternoon. It just gets right to the point. And then she goes into the directions to her house. As I come west out of Stillwater to Marshall. And follow Main Street 1 block, parenthetically west, turn right, parenthetically north, and you are at my corner. But then she inserted between and you, drive 1 block, and you are at my corner. So she wanted to be exact. Hopefully that I would not get lost, and I would be arriving on time, which I made certain I would. The directness of her, even her writing a letter represents very much her directness in writing for others and the history that she undertook. Dr. Fisher mentioned a photograph of me. That was an issue. She was looking for a photograph. Apparently, she wasn't necessarily didn't like the one that had been chosen. She wanted to make certain that came up with a good photo. This one, she didn't have anything handy, but she did have several, and I can take them back and decide about them. She wanted to particularly wanted to be careful about the photograph, as sometimes all of us are like that. Okay, And then called Tuesday morning. I was to call her Tuesday morning. Since much of my quote, my get up and go has got up and went, end quote, those are her words, I cannot be sure of what I can do on a day ahead. But just so very direct, but also very open and very courteous. And in her 3-paragraph letter, she covered a lot, even at that. And I did not get lost. But that was on March the 5th, and then March the 13th. After the fact, she wrote a letter, a follow-up. And this was, as I look back, it seems to me that we have accomplished most of what we set out to do yesterday. That's the 12th of March, 1980. I'm sorry that I got so tired that we had to quit abruptly. But when I read this later, just recently, I was trying to think back that I don't remember that. But apparently she felt like she had, at that time, been abrupt with the closing. And she takes time to apologize to me. She's going to check the, she had checked with the local newspaper and tried to get some material from them, and went on to some points about the newspaper. They spend more time talking about John Smith putting a new roof on his barn, or somebody getting employed to teach, or somebody proudly handing out cigars these days, and versus some other things that they probably should be writing about and letting people know, such as, having correspondent out there doing some other things besides what they end up putting in the newspaper. And then she wanted me to also check with the Tribune about, for the record, some of the things that we had talked about, and that she referred me to the Oklahoma Historical Society as a source for the Tribune, which was standard, continues to be standard with the Historical Society as far as their newspaper files. She thought we should get together one more time, but I think the big job in my study is done. I might even have a little vim, vigor, and vitality left over for a little visit afterwards. Actually, she puts here, I just noticed, I said vim, vigor, and vitality. She used the W as a substitute for V, a little whim, vigor, and mortality. She said Brown's finding the V key on her typewriter, but just being a little bit humorous. But it continues with the correspondence.
Is it April 11th is the next one, perhaps?
April the 11th could very well be. Let me see. I think that the event was, I apologize. Okay, we worked again on the 10th, apparently. On the 9th, actually, because I wrote a letter to her on the 10th about our time together. I apologize, I hope I hadn't tired her out too much, especially after the time before. And so she replied, my letter is the 10th, this letter is the 11th. I would assume, even though Stillwater and Marshall are fairly close, that they crossed the mail, but she does write again on the 11th, and it's fairly lengthy, but she does mention here, I believe, some of the that we had missed some of the entries, and it has some corrections that she had noticed in the draft that I provided her, and she has indicated them here, and I trust that they got into the final. That I do trust. I haven't gone back and verified that myself, but I trust those changes did get into the final. But she obviously is looking very closely at the draft. That's would be her nature, to be very careful with the material that she's using, and that's going to be out there reflecting her and her work So it would be most important for us to make certain that everything is proper. The event actually, it was in May, the 6th of May, in the browsing room here at the Edmund Lowe Library, 6th of May, 1980. We have the invitation for it, and this, I remember her asking me in another letter, or at some point she asked me about the invitation and she wanted a copy of it. Mm-hmm. She hadn't received a copy of it. And
I think there was an April 13th note
April
in there.
13th, okay.
Mm-hmm. So if we want, I can put the things over here that you are finished with if you like. Let me put this here.
She wanted a copy of the invitation, and she also wanted an invitation sent to April 13th. She mentions invitations going to 3 or 4 different people, making sure that they got them. So I trust we followed up with that. And then she had another letter, undated letter. The postmark is the April 25th. She comes up with some more people to add to the invitation list. And even in a postcard, and then June the 3rd, she, after the fact, then she, here's the postcard where she mentions, do you have any of those invitations to the reception? She didn't get one. So I told her that I did, but then she, in the interim, as I recall, she came up with one, I can keep mine, save yours, and she got one from somebody, I think maybe Dr. Fisher asked her one. But correspondence, I enjoy reading correspondence from old correspondence. This is not that old, but it's old for me anyway. But the neatness of, but still she, as does everybody, when they type out something, especially prior to opportunities to have corrections made on your typewriter, the interpolations that are inserted for corrections, and she has some on hers too, as I'm used to working with Will Rogers, a lot of strike-throughs and so forth, insertions in the margins and otherwise. But she was no different than anybody else at that time. So it's interesting to see that she was looking for perfection. She was a perfectionist in that regard, and she probably read through the letters more than once. And if it needed to be corrected, needed to be something added to it, she was not remiss to do that.
So the final correspondence from her was July 17th, I believe?
I do believe, let me certain.
1980.
I got one, yes, I wrote her on July the 15th, and yes, in a postcard 2 days later from her, your letter came today, and I think in that letter I mentioned my extra invitation. Dear Stephen, very formal. Your letter came today. Don't send me that lone copy of the invitation. I want you to have it. I'm looking forward to a visit from you and the lady with the lovely voice. Apparently Helen answered the phone once. As soon as we get better weather. Sincerely, Angie Debo. And I can't tell you if we had a chance to go to Marshall to visit her. My memory's not that superb, but I don't recall that we did. But I reread to Helen this mention by Angie of the lady with lovely voice, and Helen was quite delighted. That again, her politeness, her diligence, following up and things and so forth, just remarkable. And so I just pleased that I had the opportunity to to meet her more than once and to work with her so closely on something that was obviously important to her too, as it shows with her reaction to making certain it got corrected and going through it carefully and bringing it to our attention, making certain it was perfected.
Well, obviously, it's clear that it's an important part of the historical record to have that list all compiled in one place, too.
Yeah, bibliographies are important. I use them all the time myself for others that I'm researching and writing about, such as Will Rogers, and they're critical at times.
So, as far as you can remember, your path with Angie Debo never crossed again after this few months of time in 1980.
Correct. Not that it might have happened, I just don't, it just doesn't come to mind this time.
Did you attend the event? Do you remember?
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. 1980 was the year that I became director of the Will Rogers Research Project. So it was another big moment in my life at the time, yes.
What do you recall about that event that the library and the history department held in her honor?
I apologize. I apologize, I can't even place where it was. I would assume it was, let's just go back to the facts are here for the invitations. There we go. Well, it's going to be in the browsing room, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, which, one of my favorite rooms here, actually. I spent a lot of time in the browsing room researching on Will, so that would have been almost an ordinary day for me, other than the fact that it involved Angie. I'd like to say that I can remember that moment, but I won't. I can't.
Okay. What do you think about her research and the books that she wrote, coming from your perspective as a historian?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think it's unusual for me that others that have followed her work would say also that they were thorough. She wrote thoroughly, she wrote carefully, she wrote historically correctly, she wrote in a balanced way, and by the same hand was not immune from criticizing any parties involved in whatever the issue might be, making criticism if it was it's apparent that it should be criticized. She did thorough research. She was finding information, putting it out before the public that others were disregarding or not locating. Her work, especially with regarding Native American history, was advanced beyond what many others were pursuing at the time. And she was somebody that would become a model for that kind of thorough research that other historians or wannabe historians would follow and use the same kind of talents, the same kind of thoroughness.
Have you had a chance to read some of her books over the years?
Especially at that time. Well, for example, the disappearance, I believe, is there. Yeah, and I started reading her work actually before I arrived at OSU, because again, my studies at Wichita State University for my master's, I was focused on Native American history, and William Unruh was my advisor for much of that time, and he directed me to Angie Debo's work as work that I needed to study and read and follow. I was introduced to her work before I arrived at OSU, and it would become during my time here also work that I would continue to follow.
What was William's last name?
Unrau, U-N-R-A-U. He has a lot of work also in Native American, the Kansas Indians, for example, one of his books.
Do you have a favorite book of the books that she wrote that you've read? Does one stand out to you as your favorite?
Well,
yes.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
thank you. Yeah. The Road to Disappearance, remarkable. Even it's not a Native American history work, but Prairie City, for example, remarkable book about the biography of a little town. Just again taking a storyline and exploring it very carefully, but putting and writing a story of that place or those events in words that people can understand and appreciate and cling to. Road to Disappearance and the Waters. Still
the Waters Run.
Still the Waters Run, and so forth. The Prairie City, they're all remarkable. They're all remarkable. She has quite a talent. Amazing.
Over the years, various people, including Danny Goebel and Governor Brad Henry, have referred to Angie Debo as Oklahoma's greatest historian. Would you concur with that?
Oh, yeah. There's no doubt about it. I mean, and those two particularly, I would think that David Baird would also be among them to rave about her research and her writing, and others too, for that matter. Yeah, she was foremost, continues to be foremost.
You share an honor with Angie Debo. In 1994, she was inducted into the Oklahoma Historians Hall of Fame, and you were inducted in 2016. Tell me a little bit about that award and what it means.
Well, for me, it was a total surprise. She would probably put it off as totally unnecessary and so forth. She deserves it. I just happen to know Bob Blackburn. No, I don't know. I was surprised, but she certainly deserves the all-time Oklahoma historian of the century.
Hall of Fame. You think you would call her the historian of the century?
She is, yeah. And now into the next century, and maybe Oklahoma historian of the millennium.
Of the millennium, okay. As you look back on your interactions with Angie Debo, in what ways, if any, did she influence you?
Put those away before I crush them.
Okay.
I'm sorry, how did she?
Yeah, as you look back and think back on your interactions with her,
Yeah.
in what ways did she influence you? You were a graduate student
Right.
At that time.
Yes, I was, certainly. And the influence would be just, as much as wanting to pursue the same dedication of accuracy in my research, strengthen my communication of that research, and the personality of being gracious and being very I can't say that I think over time that I have exhibited those kinds of qualities that she represented, but to say that I grabbed them and intentionally and applied them to my historical research in life is perhaps a step beyond what I can actually claim. but just her personality, just her nature was an inspiration.
In what ways did that influence your career?
Well, thoroughness in research has been an important part of my life. In working with Will Rogers and my other research, Wiley Post for that matter. But thoroughness, verification, verify, and trying to communicate what I've learned as best as I can so that people understand what I have found through my research and can use that understanding to appreciate Will Rogers and understand him better. So she helped in that regard.
Is there anything else you would like to share about Angie Debo that I have not asked?
I can't think of anything, Karen. Offhand, you covered it very well. Again, I wish I had opportunities later, or I wish I had had an opportunity before that, in 1980, to get to know her. Because I think she was very approachable too. But I didn't make the approach. Probably should have. But I wish she was still around and that we could reconnect.
What would you ask her if she were still here?
Why didn't you let me know? How did I miss those pieces of your bibliography and I didn't get into that first version? How did that happen? I don't recall what I did to miss that, and then she would have had the draft and we could have gotten it taken care of and so forth. So I don't know. I, having worked with Will Rogers, I have to send all my manuscripts to so many different people, including Will Jr., and including the director of the museum, and so forth. And so I became immune to people criticizing and showing me where I needed to strengthen this or that, and different words to use and so forth. So it wouldn't hurt my feelings if she had let me know. So I don't know if that was the case, but I don't know. So.
Okay. David, do you have any questions about Angie Debo that you want to ask for this part?
Nothing really about Angie. We do have her works here, and so I would probably have most, if not all, of her writings, and even including book reviews and those kinds of things.
I would think so, yes.
Do you feel like you need to take a break at all, or would you like to keep going?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm David Peters, and Stephen has agreed to continue a discussion with us. I'd like to follow up on some things related to the Will Rogers research project that took place at Oklahoma State University. Let's back up briefly. So you get your master's degree at Wichita State University, you get married, and Monday morning you show up at OSU.
Right.
Why OSU of all places?
OSU because of Odie Falk.
Odie Falk.
And went to Wichita State because Bill Unruh was there. And my brother had studied under Bill Unruh at Bethany College, where I also did my BA. He recommended working with Bill Unruh, so I went to Wichita State to study under Bill Unruh, and it was an exceptional time. And then and Bill Unruh directed me and suggested OSU. I can pursue Western history because of Odie Falk and he was there by that time, and so I chose that, and that's why I showed up at OSU. I was a graduate assistant in the history department and Tim Zwink was starting at that time. Bob Blackburn was starting his PhD work also at that time. And so it was an interesting group of graduate students, and great time. Joe Stout was there, and others that, it's a pretty good department, very good.
You mentioned W. David Baird. Was he here when you first arrived, or did he?
No, he would replace Odie Falk. He would come in after Odie Falk left.
So, but he was on the faculty.
No, he
wasn't. They brought him in.
No, he was in California
Okay.
at can't recall the university there. Starts with a P.
When he leaves here, he goes to Pepperdine. So,
Pepperdine, that's right.
and acts as assistant
Exactly,
or
yeah.
as a dean, I think, at Pepperdine.
Yeah,
So that's where he came
Pepperdine,
from.
where he came from.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Any other faculty members you remember having interaction with? Because there was quite a group at that time who were interested in
Right.
the South, especially the American Southwest.
I studied particularly, Odie Falk, Joe Stout, Mike Smith. One of my areas was Latin America, was Spanish American history. I should say Latin American history. And Rick Roars was just writing about that time. And who else? Well, I didn't Leroy Fisher, and I think I took 1 or 2 classes with Leroy Fisher, Dr. Fisher. But I did take a course with Ted Agnew, and I think primarily it. Starts with B.
Bernie Eisenstadt was here. He was Russian history.
I didn't study that. My wife was studying Russian language at the time. No.
Okay. There's a project to produce the works of Will Rogers that starts, I think, in the mid-60s, about 67, 68, something like that.
The contract was signed in 67 between OSU and the Will Rogers Memorial Museum to collect, edit, and publish the original intention, all of the writings and papers of Will Rogers.
And Ted Agnew is named as the first editor
Correct.
For this project.
Correct.
How much do you know about the early activities of the Will Rogers Research Project? And
what I've researched, I wasn't
Okay.
there when it was initiated, but in my preparation for the article that I ended up writing for the AD and the documentary editing publication, I discovered that yes, Ted Agnew was he had been teaching full time. He was given a half-time assignment for the Will Rogers Research Project, and Ted, I think at Yale or Harvard that he studied at, came from. His PhD work was done there, and he would end up pursuing the work, the effort as one would pursue very carefully at a major Ivy League institution, very carefully. The staff at the museum, which was a two-person, primarily a two-person staff, husband and wife. The Loves, Paula Love was a niece of Will Rogers. She was the head of she had the title of curator, but really essentially, as we would call it, the director.
and her maiden name was McSpadden.
Yes,
Okay.
Paula McSpadden Love, and niece of Will, and one that he helped put through college, one that who suffered from polio and would continue to be incapacitated slightly by that through her life, her adult life. And her husband, Bob, was the manager of the property there at the museum. And they were very happy to start this project. And they, in fact, Bob Love said it'd probably take 5 years to get the first publication out. But their expectations and their push changed dramatically not too long after the project began, and they were expecting the first publication within a year's time. And that's not, given the volume of material that you're working with, millions of pages of copy and so forth, and the how to organize it, how to go through it, how to edit it, how to annotate it, how to get it ready for publication and so forth, and all being done here at OSU in that regard, was more than they expected. And they would get disgruntled. The Loves and the Commission, the Will Rogers Memorial Commission, would get disenchanted with the progress or lack thereof here at OSU, and all kinds of letters back and forth between President Kalm at the time and the chair of the commission, Lake, and the Loves and Agnew and so forth. There was quite a bit of disorder. And so there was a lot of disgruntlement, and as it turned out, even the organization, where are you going to start? Where are you going to start publishing? You got all these newspaper articles, some weekly articles, the daily articles, all of his magazine articles, his books, 6 of those, and then let alone the papers, the correspondence and so forth, and the scripts. And he was prolific with his production of what, no matter when he was, almost no matter when he was going to speak at a microphone, and whether it was going to be on not television, but radio, or on stage, or whatever setting it might be, almost invariably he would peck out, with 2 fingers, peck out a script. And he would handwrite it initially. His first ones were handwritten, but then he would peck them out with his laptop. And I call it a laptop because it was situated on his knees and wherever he might be. But the production materials, tremendous volume. And how to sort through it, how to organize it, how to begin to, you're going to do it chronologically, you're going to do it by groups such as the daily telegrams together or what. And so they, OSU, Ted Agnew, they created the Will Rogers Research Project, and the staff was, I don't know how big the staff was, but it wasn't great. And based here in the library, 3rd floor, they decided after a lot of back and forth and several threats by the museum to pull out of it, to stop it, to quit it, Ted Agnew, and finally came up with a plan, and then that plan would be that they would work on the daily telegrams first, and they would produce 2 volumes of the daily telegrams, which was remarkable that they would decide to think that all those daily telegrams could be compacted into 2 volumes, because, as you may know, it ended up to be 4 volumes, because you have better than about 2,500, 2 or 3, 4 or 5 paragraphs each of these daily telegrams. Not just you have the telegrams being republished, you have to also verify that the copy that you're going to be publishing is as close to the original as possible, because the originals weren't always available. And what might be published in the New York Times differ from the Boston Globe and so forth. So there had to be a comparison, and there had to be those mentions of different copy in this publication versus that one, or in the original manuscript. So it was quite a task, and then you had the annotations, and first effort finally that Ted Agnew accomplished, or he and his crew, and I'm not criticizing Dr. Agnew, but the first production was something like 500 pages, published 500 pages, of material. And when Will Rogers Jr. saw it, he was just shocked by the absurdity of what Agnew was doing with his father's work, trying to explain the jokes, so to speak, as he went along. And again, it was a mammoth volume. And one of the points that I made at the conference, where you had Franklin papers and the Twain papers and the Rogers papers being presented and discussed, I said, one of the main issues with working with the Will Rogers papers is that those editors are the only ones that are still working with the family, members of the family. Because I would have to send my manuscripts to Will Rogers Jr., as did Ted Agnew and so forth. So I wasn't there initially, and the first volume that actually was published would come after Ted Agnew had left. After he was moved back into the department, he was happy to go as a full-time instructor. By that time, Odie Falk had come into the department as chair. Before that was Dr. Knight, Raymond Knight. And Dr. Falk is now chair, and Dr. Tom is saying, do something. And so they moved Joe Stout in to replace Ted Agnew as the director. And they decided to put aside the daily telegrams and go for the easier start, and that would be to take the 6 volumes that Will had published and republish those, and edit, annotate, and republish those. So the text was already there. There's no question about variations in that text and so forth. And so that's what they did. 1967, the contract was signed. The first volume came off the press in 1973. So that was 6 years. Keep in mind that Bob Love, as I said, had expected it would take 5 years anyway. So it was close as far as the first volume rolling off the press. But unfortunately, whether I don't know whether she was still alive or not, but that was about the same time that Paula Love passed away. So whether she actually knew that a volume had come off the press, I don't know. But whether she would have been satisfied with that volume is another question anyway. So that was the first, and it would start the ball rolling, and eventually, as you may know, there was 21 volumes, I believe, including the cumulative index, when it was all said and done. But what changed was that, what major change was that the project focused only on his writings, his published writings, previously published writings, plus any radio broadcast that had that there were audio recordings for to verify the text. So the 21 volumes included all of his previously published writings, his daily telegrams, his magazine articles, his books, his weekly articles, and then the 1 volume of radio broadcast.
So by moving to the 6 books, they could get those coming out on a fairly regular basis, and while they were being then actually printed, they could continue working on the massive tome of stuff for the daily telegrams and the other articles and those kinds of things.
Well, actually, hadn't been, in the process, there wasn't a lot of pre-work done on even the dailies or the weeklies. Again, getting through the books is easier than the dailies and the weeklies will become. But again, 1973 was the first volume. That was Ether and Me, or just relax. And you have the two Will Rogers-isms and the Illiterate Digest and so forth. I came onto the project. Again, I joined as I came to the department in '75, fall of '75. The spring of '76, my next semester, they assigned me to the Will Rogers Research Project. I knew about it, but I didn't know Will Rogers that well. But that was my introduction. And why they did that, I have no idea. I've always wondered why was I assigned. And because there were others and some other very good students.
And Joe Stout is still the editor.
Joe Stout is the editor. Peter Rollins is working half-time, splitting between the English department and the project.
I was asking about Peter Rollins because I know he had some involvement at that point. And then you were brought on to assist. Were there other graduate students who were assigned to the project?
No, not at that time.
Okay.
Eventually we would bring a couple in periodically. But no, I was the only graduate student, only student there. Again, Peter, and mostly it was Joe, and Peter and Joe's wife actually was what would become his wife down the road. She was in there, and then of course there was in the northeast corner of the office was a remarkable person by the name of Glenn Shirley. And he wasn't involved with the editing, but he was coordinating the publishing. Exactly. He was representing the university press, which was virtually non-existent, except for the Will Rogers books.
Right. One of the few things that came out of the university press later, the Centennial History series, but yeah. It was, okay.
And Joe left in about 77, excuse me, yeah, 77. Back in the department, history department full time. Jim Smallwood took his place, part half-time, teaching half-time the project, and he wanted to go back after a while, he wasn't doing anything. In fact, anyway. And they let me be the director of that.
So, under Smallwood, were you acting kind of like an assistant editor, or?
I became my first title just student graduate, but I became an assistant editor, and then associate editor, and then editor.
When Dr. Smallwood went back to the department.
Yeah.
Okay.
Editor and director of the project. Yeah.
Okay. And you're still taking classes?
Yeah. And I was working on my PhD, but my focus was on the project, and I was kind of got to the point where, hey, I'm producing more books than some of these PhD students will ever produce in their lives. So as I said, I did the comps and the oral, did the comps and the oral test exam, but I did a lot of research, but I didn't get around to writing it.
What was your research on for your dissertation?
Wiley
Post.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I went to DC and I researched there at the National Air and Space Museum and so forth. Did a lot of research.
Had you thought about Wiley Post? Or did that come to you after you started working with Will Rogers?
After.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. You talked about some of the challenges the early editors faced, but then over a period of time they finally got that resolved.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't they also change? It sounds like initially Dr. Agnew would produce something and then it kind of went out for a small review and it got panned.
Well, he only produced
later did, but don't they later kind of develop a procedure for these books working through a system?
Well, they did produce. That was one of the criticisms of OSU's setup by the Loves and by others. They even consulted with a person who was prominent in the historical editing field at the time. And major criticism was you don't have any process, you don't have any review board that you have set up a committee that reviews your procedures and reviews your production. There wasn't anything like that. And so they did finally put something like that together. Interestingly enough, though, all the people that were on this review committee for the Papers Project were people here at OOHRP, outsiders. And there weren't that many individuals on faculty that were qualified as documentary editors. There was a few issues there, but and there never was, to my observation as I was thinking back, I wasn't completely clued into the procedures and everything initially, but I never recall that there was a outside group that they would send the manuscript to, other than the director of the museum, which after Paul had passed away would be Reba Collins in early 80s, mid 70s. And Reba Collins would be director until beyond my time, after we finished the project. So she would just be there until the early 90s.
Well, how did Will Jr. or Bill, how did he get involved then?
Well, again, he was involved because he was on the Will Rogers Memorial Commission. In fact, he was chair, not chair, he was part of the Will Rogers Memorial Commission. The papers for the statute creating the Will Rogers Memorial Commission stipulated that there would be a member of the family, direct descendant of Will Rogers on the commission, as long as one is willing to serve. And start with Will Jr., of course, he was the eldest of the siblings, and then later Jim Rogers would succeed him when Will began to decline health-wise. So, but Will would be one of those that you would send your manuscript to have him review it. I'd send it to Reba, I'd send it to Will. Reba, and Will would often share it with Brian Sterling, and Brian Sterling was somebody very active in producing Will Rogers material, books and so forth about Will Rogers, and he was based in New York, and he would be critical, very critical, and I would get his remarks back, and Will's and Bill Jr. and Bill's, it was actually they called him Bill, and Reba's, and collate it all and make the changes needed to make and get it ready for publication.
How would you balance if they disagreed amongst themselves? If Reba wanted one thing and Bill wanted something different, and I mean, how would you balance those kinds of things?
I would go with what I think I thought was the best. Sometimes what Bill would suggest would be not that valid. And there could be some things that he wasn't aware of as we were doing the collating of the different sources for the words that Will had been published under his name as we went from one publication to another. Because sometimes newspapers wouldn't publish what Will had written from one reason to another. And there was issues, for example, we did make some changes that Ted had not done according to the museum the right thing regarding, for example, he would have footnotes, endnotes populating the text. And Bill Jr. and others thought that was distracting. Took away from Will's words to see all of a sudden here's a 2 or a 3 or whatever. So it was reorganized not by me but by others there to, for example, we did it. They continued to populate the text in the books. I did that back, and books and magazine articles. When it came to the dailies and to the weeklies, we did, and that's after I very much part of it. We published endnotes, and we coordinated. We had numbered the weeklies, we had numbered the dailies, and so the endnotes would appear, let's say, 222 weekly article, and give a citation where it's published and the source for our text, and then the endnotes under that. And not coordinating it with a number that would show up in the text, but just simply put in an order of their mention, because it might be mentioned. Usually, he's writing about people that others wouldn't know today or at the time. So, whoever it might be, we would give the historical information about that person.
So provide a little contextual.
In a sequential order as it appeared in the text.
So by the end of the project, but there's a general agreement about a process of review for the material that it's being shared by all interested entities, at least, maybe not outside of OSU in Oklahoma, but I guess with the fellow in New York. And there's also some stylistic changes that are adopted that seem to please everyone with how the work is presented. So, so you stay with the project until it's completed. Right. And when was it completed?
It was completed in '83.
'83.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Exactly. And Will Jr. came for that to celebrate the conclusion of it. The last volume was the radio broadcast. Cumulative index was still in process. Obviously, but radio broadcast was the last volume. So it was celebrating the publication, and so we made it available to dignitaries, copies of it available to dignitaries as it came. And there were numbered books. There were 39 or 40 or so people that received a numbered book, signed and numbered. And there were those, but there was this big event here on campus. Well, we thought it was big. Big event, not like a football game. Big event on campus, celebrate.
A big academic event.
Yeah, publishing of the radio broadcast, and thus the conclusion of the project.
So from '73 to '83, roughly 10 years, 20 volumes are produced. So once it got going, then proceeded fairly quickly.
Well, right, and when I was told to get it moving, Dr. Com, they were looking forward to conclude as quickly as possible.
And I'm assuming Dr. Com was interested in the project because he was no longer president in '83.
No,
but I'm assuming he was still actively
interested
in making
special issue. Yeah, Dean Grease. Here's another one I would actually send or offer it. Not always that he would want to see a proof copy, but I would offer him a proof copy too.
And Grease is Dean of Arts and Sciences at this time. So, okay. So, what impact do you think these publications have on Will's legacy?
I think putting all of his work, putting it in volumes, and it's accessible online too at the not the project, but the museum's website. You can access the dailies and you can access the weeklies in a searchable format. So to make them accessible, obviously puts his words out there for others to access and tap and use and appreciate. The sales of the books, now weren't phenomenal by any means. One of them, you got a university press publishing it, that's all, and it's the only work that are publishing and not the biggest marketing program at the time. But the word is out there, and I can tell you that it's remarkable for me when I'm working at the museum, having worked at the museum, how popular his words are today, and will probably continue to be. At least, not everybody's going to be aware of them, but the relevance of them, the timelessness of them, is remarkable.
His commentary still seems applicable oftentimes in situations we face today, and over the last 20, 30 years, as we go through political changes and challenges, he seems to have remarkable insight long after his passing.
It's incredible. One of the things when I would go out and speak at that time, is I would, before I was in Rotary, I would go out and speak to Rotary clubs. And I would always give them a bunch of his statements about Rotary and Rotarians. And they weren't the most complimentary statements. You just saw them as a bunch of luncheon clubbers. And but what I would learn as I got into Rotary was that there was something about Rotary that Will would have been so proud of and so taken with, and he would have ended his comments, derogatory comments, and that was the cause of polio with his niece, but that was his major cause in his life was his polio, his children afflicted by polio and others. So if he had known what Rotary was trying to end up doing.
And he had adopted a number of other causes too, especially during the Depression. But polio was, I think, because of the impact it had on his own family, and of course, Rotary was service above self. At least that's the objective. Well, he had a critical eye for a lot of things.
Oh, exactly. And he was balanced.
Yeah. So how then did you get involved with Will Rogers Memorial in Claremore?
Well, I certainly had gone over there many a time. But there was another fortuitous moment in my life. After the project ended, I got into publishing here in Stillwater. This is Stillwater. Am I in Claremore or Stillwater? With the Western Publications, True West West magazine. So I was able to stay in publishing and taught a little bit here at OSU when the history faculty was short-wise and needed somebody to teach a general course. But I also taught for a year and a half at OBU, and then I connected with, I wanted to do something on an international level, and I joined World Neighbors. If you're familiar with that. Joined World Neighbors as a development director.
I think you were headquartered at Oklahoma City at the time.
And International Development Organization, I became development director. And so I'd go out to the donors to the organization to go visit them. And one that I went to visit was a donor at OBU, and Doug Watson. And I was sitting in his office. He taught English there, and I'd been there at OBU previously to teach. And this first time I sat in his office, and I was looking at his books. Again, I like to look at people's libraries, and they were stacked with and stocked with Will Rogers books. I said, "You have an interest in Will Rogers?" And he said, "Oh yeah, he performs as Will Rogers." And then he said, "Oh, are you the same guy?" And I said, "Yes."
That guy.
And just not too long thereafter, I got a call. I was contacted by Will Rogers Memorial Museum, because they were working on another publishing project, the papers of Will Rogers, and they had completed 2 volumes. The papers, I mean, his letters, correspondence to and from, and other documents that had never been previously published. And they finished 2 volumes, and the editor, they were dissatisfied with the editor, and they wanted a new editor. And they were told that, Doug told them, because he was very much a part of their life too, and told them, they actually approached him to see if he would be willing to take it on. He said, no, but I know a guy that might be interested. And Joe Carter thought I was dead. But anybody that know he must be dead. But so that was my contact to take on that and finish those volumes. And there were,
So how many volumes were you involved with
I said there were 2. They actually they completed 3 and got Will up to his to 1915, and so I produced the last 2 volumes. They were actually going to produce all of his, just like OSU, going to redo all of his other writings and make it one complete volume, one complete set. And but they were desperate to get it done now, and so his most prolific years, last 20 years of his life, they wanted done as in 2 volumes. So we did that. And I think it's fun.
So then when you finished editing?
When I finished editing it, and I was actually working on it here at my house, and I would come into the library to research.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing all my research here.
Third floor office was no longer available.
No, exactly. So I was researching, working at home, out of the house, and researching here, and getting it taken care of. OU published the books, and so I worked with them, and then they, after got the 6th volume was in the press, they wanted me to come over to the museum and work over there. So that was 2004, and then before I knew it, the director at the time, Michelle Carter, Joe's wife, had decided to retire in 2006. Issues with the legislature at the time, Terrell was turning, the legislature was becoming Republican, and the Carters were totally Democratic.
And there was some state support for the memorial, is that correct?
Right. The museum is a standalone, had been until just very recently, a standalone state agency.
Okay.
Yes, so you had, the director had to go to the state legislature and make the case for the museum, and it's a line item budget. So it could get pretty tense, especially at that time, because it was, Republicans were hoping on it. Anyway.
We're fine.
Okay.
This is a safe zone.
Okay, anyway, they were, she didn't have anything to do with the House, I think, at that time, or was it the Senate? One of the 2 had come on to Republican majority. And so she would send me to represent the museum and make the case and so forth. And next thing in 2006, fall of 2006, there was going to be another commission meeting, and held it quarterly, and October 2006, and that was a weekend, and so my mother passed away that weekend, or just before the weekend, so I went to Kansas City, went home and to attend to that, and got back, and Jim Hart's son, if that name rings a bell with you.
I've heard the name, but
NBC broadcaster, newsman. He was chair of the commission. Got back to the museum, walked in. I was really about as low as I could get, and he pulled me aside and said, told me about the fact that she had withdrawn and retired, and the commission has appointed you to as interim director. So below, it was a tough time.
But you were pleased with that opportunity?
Yeah, sure, sure. You can't help. I was amazed, really. I never knew why I ended up working with the Will Rogers Project here at OSU in the first place, and then one thing led to another, and so maybe it was predestined. I don't know.
A little serendipity somehow. So you're named interim director in 2006?
October 2006, and then elected director in December 2006.
And then how long did you serve as director then?
Until my retirement in August of 2014.
Okay. Anything you want to add about the museum in Claremore?
It's in a different situation now, as you may know. It's no longer a standalone agency. It has been merged with the Oklahoma Historical Society.
Okay.
As you know, Bob Blackburn is the director of that, and Bob and I have been friends again from graduate school days. And many a time when I was director, we would be both at the Capitol dealing with proposed mergers and proposed eliminations and so forth. And we had said that it's almost inevitable, it's going to happen. But to be at the table ourselves and arranging how it should happen, that would be better than being told that you are no longer the case or no longer a standalone agency. So that's really what it came down to after another time came along, and as Bob and I had talked about, it happened with my successor, Tad Jones, who is a former state representative, Republican. And actually, it's interesting, when I was director, during one of those moments, I had been in conversation with RSU, Rogers State University, about a merger with them, moving the museum under the umbrella of RSU, which is under the umbrella of OU. And so we were in Joe Wiley's office, the president's office, and myself and Tad and Sean Burridge, who was the state senator from that area, Democrat, Tad Republican, and I was sitting between the two, and Joe Wiley excuses himself for a moment and goes out, and Tad turned to me and said, "What are you?" And I had that question asked me at OBU too. What are you? But that wasn't about politics, it was about religion. So, and I just looked around, and Sean said,
Well, so do you think the museum is in a fairly stable position right now under the Oklahoma Historical Society?
It's a very strong, much stronger. Of course, I mean, still the issue of funding is there.
And that whole agency has challenges that they've been trying to deal with as effectively as possible.
Bob is very welcoming of the Memorial Museum, and it's a class museum in the state. One of the top. There's a lot of museums in Oklahoma, but it's very strong, and infrastructure has improved. We did for quite a while. We did not have a dehumidification system, but that is now going in place. So infrastructurally, it's strong. The mission is ideal. Will is still prominent, and people are still coming. It's good situation for the Historical Society.
Is there any, or what kind of partnerships are there with like the Will Rogers site in California at his home? Is there much interaction?
Oh yeah, yes. We have a very strong relationship, and a member, I told you about the member of the family that's on the commission. Well, that member now is a great-granddaughter of Will. The granddaughter of Jimmy Rogers, her father, Kim Rogers, grandson, served on the commission. He passed away. She took his position. She serves on the commission, but she also is active out there in California at the ranch, part of the foundation there, because that's where she lives in California, in Bakersfield. So with that, there's that connection, plus I and other directors have interacted very strongly with the staff there as far as the Will's effects and Will's archives. So yes, we do very strongly, work strongly with them. And there are no other, well, and then the Will Rogers Institute. It's a institute that originated after his death, institute that was focused on health issues. In fact, it was called initially Will Rogers Hospital. But it's still operating, moved from New York. It's now in California also, and it gives funds to, it receives funds to be applied to especially benefit actors and others in the movie and television industry that are lacking means to take care of them. There's some of their health issues. And if you ever went to a movie and they passed the cup to put coins in, this is a long time ago, but yeah, they would have Will Rogers fundraising using Will Rogers' name, where you would they would pass
the offering in the theater,
yeah, in the theater. But now it's a lot smoother because they take a percentage of the concession sales.
Well, I'll feel better next time I order a bag of M&Ms. So Will's actual papers are located both at the museum here in Claremore, and are there some papers in California then also?
So there are a few papers. The vast majority are here, are in Claremore. Yes, yes, exactly.
But then there's objects and other possessions.
Other objects out there. There's still some papers out there too, for that matter. There's always somebody coming forward with having a letter in hand that passed down through the family and so forth. The costume that he wore in a particular movie shows up, and there's all these remembrances, materials that come along unexpectedly.
The ephemera of life seems to trickle down in different ways.
There's a lot out there hidden away that'll never show up, unfortunately.
He was very active for a long period of time in a lot of different things.
Exactly.
So. What are your plans now?
Well, we, Helen and I are relocating to, we have a place in Ocean City, Maryland, that's still standing. And we're going to be spending half of our year there. In the high season, we rented, it's a condo on the shore. So we rent it in the high season, but we'll be heading there in October, and we'll be there until the springtime, and then we have a place in Colorado. So we have our house in Claremore on the market, and the contract is there if you want to sign it.
Oh, okay.
But I do research, and I'm still involved with the foundation, Will Rogers Memorial Foundation, and I've got a project underway that I get distracted, diverted at times, but to focus on his humanitarianism. There's really, I don't think enough has been written or said about his humanitarianism, his philanthropy, and the way he reached out to people. You mentioned it also.
Right.
But
he organized a little tour in the 30s that came through this campus
Exactly.
and a number of other places, and in a very short period of time,
Oh, yeah, you
they
wrote
raised quite a bit of money and
did a good job.
a lot of goodwill, and so.
That's one of those projects that people, not that many people know about, and that was just one, a major one. That was just one of many.
Right. Right. Oh, he wasn't afraid to jump in.
Right. He gave out of his pocket considerably along the way.
Is there anything about Will Rogers we don't know that we should know? You probably know him as well as anyone at this point.
Oh, should know, or yeah.
He's been an active part of your life for
Yeah.
well on to what, 40 some years?
My professional work has been
Right.
Yeah, something like that. Maybe 15. Don't make me too old. But
I'm just going, it's 1973, you got involved in what, 77?
75.
75. Okay.
76 is my.
Okay, 76.
Yeah, 76 with the project.
And we know what date this recording is taking place, so
Okay. All right.
don't want to pin you down though, Steve. So of the 15 years you were.
Right. Actually, it's interesting. There was a lecture given the other night at the museum by Hugh Foley. Hugh. Yeah, and it was regarding, and they're because they're preparing a special exhibit, Will Rogers and other Native American Indians from Oklahoma and film. And so Hugh has been researching that, and it's going to be a temporary exhibit there, and then hit the road exhibit. But there was an episode there in Claremore just the night before he spoke, where somebody saw at the local museum a swastika, what we call today a swastika, and the person was most upset that this was in the public part of the art there at the museum. Well, at the Memorial Museum, on a saddle blanket, Will's is also a swastika. That's in the gallery. What this person didn't understand is that, yes, swastika goes well before the pre-Columbian era, and well before the 1930s, 20s. So, and Hugh Foley was making comments about Will and what some people might perceive as criticize as perhaps his racism, his position toward feelings about Black Americans, and he had those moments where he would say something that people would jump on. For example, in a national radio broadcast using the word the N word. He was talking about spirituals, Negro spirituals, because he loved to sing them. And he had the word Negro, which was more appropriate at that time. He used the other N word. And national broadcasting just created a lot of pushback. But, and he was talking about that and saying, we might should prepare for other criticism of Will and as it regards blacks. And he was in motion pictures with Stephen Vetchett, and others.
And blacks are playing these very stereotypical roles.
Well, and then Hugh mentioned that there was a film, one of his films, you could hear off set, you could hear him performing or singing as another language in the manner of Stephen Vetchett. Stephen Vetchett was in some of his films. And they actually then panned over, and there he was. Well, and that's perhaps an example. Some people can interpret that as an example of him and his racism, racist interpretation. But my response to that is that mimicry was a staple of his entertainment delivery. He mimicked quite often. He mimicked Bing Crosby singing the crooner. Bing Crosby in one of his films, and it was, I mean, Bing Crosby might not have been too happy about that. He mimicked Big President on national radio broadcast. And Calvin Coolidge, he had apologized to Calvin Coolidge later. So mimicry was just one of his staples. He used Yiddish in some of his stage performances.
Oh, and he'd been in the Ziegfeld Follies
and did some blackface and so forth. And so it wasn't pure by any means, but you got to be mindful too of the full person and how he performed and what he did.
so again, contextualization is critical sometimes to understanding a broader view of the picture. So, okay. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you.
Anything else? I think I've worn you out.
No,
appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
We will shut it down.
Okay.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.